What's up guys, in this video I'm just kind of going over the fuel system setup that I'm going to be using for the shop truck build. So if you haven't already and you want to get caught up, I'll link to a playlist, but basically I bought a 2006 Crown Vic, took the engine, the transmission, front suspension and everything out of it, and it is currently in my 67 F100. So obviously you're gonna have to run a new kind of fuel system, so that's kind of what I'm going over today, and it is pretty straightforward, but you just have to follow a few basic little things. So this video is going to be all about that. Basically, I've got a 1970 Mustang tank put in here. It really does slide in whenever you clearance some things. I think I had to take like a half an inch off of this side, or no, quarter inch off this side, and then a quarter inch off of this side. That got you about 30 inches, and then the tank was able to slide in. So I did have to take that all the way up through here. Then basically the last cross member is going to go up under here, get bolted in, and then support all this. So right now this is just kind of laying here. All right, so this kit is through Tanks Incorporated, and basically it's Phytech using Tanks Incorporated. All of these mounts are already threaded, so it makes life a lot easier, especially compared to drilling this stuff out in your factory tank. But either way, you don't have to have this tank. You can drill the holes and make your factory tank work. Another reason I went with the Tanks Incorporated is because there are baffles in here. So as you can see, the pump is going to sit in that little housing right there. So it'll sit right down in here. And as you can see, you have a baffled area. It's going to be a nice place for a fuel pump to sit. So what you're going to need for a EFI setup, which you could set this up for just a normal carbureted engine, but for EFI, you're going to need a fuel pressure regulator. You'll get this fuel sending kit, so that tells you your fuel level, and then you'll get this fuel pump, and this is already assembled, but I want to go over kind of what you need to do to make this all work. So the very first thing is you're going to take a measurement from the top of the tank down to the bottom of the tank until the tape measure bottoms out. So for me, that is right around 9 inches. So a good rule of thumb is you want the filter sock to sit about 1/8 of an inch off of the bottom of the tank, and the reason you don't want it any further, like touching the tank, is because it can actually bottom out, and then you'll have issues with picking up fuel in there. So basically my goal was to go from the bottom of this flange, and granted there is a little gasket that goes on there, so you'll have to allot yourself some room for that. But so basically you measure all the way to the bottom of the filter sock, and you're just kind of holding things kind of side by side because this clear tube here does not come cut to size. So you want to make sure that from the bottom of that to the filter sock, which it's puffed out because it's resting on the tank, but about 1/8 of an inch shy of 9 inches. Basically, whenever you're holding all that in place to take your measurements, you're going to want to cut this bracket to length. It doesn't have to be any kind of specific length, just long enough to where you can attach this pump to it. And then you'll wrap your wires around this whole assembly, and then it just plugs in, and this whole thing sits down in the tank. This is a return hose right here, this black hose, and then the end of it just gets cut at a 45. Obviously I'm going to clean some of that crap off of there, but the end of it just gets cut at a 45-degree angle, and then it sits in there about 1/4 inch off the bottom of the tank. So now, depending on your application, all you're going to do now is just kind of walk this thing in here. Obviously you're going to make your connection before you do that, but you're going to walk all this stuff in there and feed it all in until it's completely all sat inside that baffle right there. Again, you do want to just kind of make note of where all this stuff is, because you don't want the filter sock getting hung up on anything. And then on this side you have your fuel sending unit. So as you can see, we're going to have to run the pickup for this running like this. So the motion in that is going to have to go that way, because if it's running this way, then obviously it's going to interfere with where that baffle is through there. All right guys, so next you have your fuel sending unit right here. So basically this comes with the rod detached from it. So you have to loosen this little set screw, and then you're basically just going to slide that through that. So it doesn't have to be like crazy accurate, but it's supposed to be 1/8 of an inch from the bottom of the flange there. So if you were to draw a line straight over, the ball at the top of its travel right there should be that should be around 1/8 of an inch. All right guys, so next up is obviously getting the fuel from the tank up to the engine. So I'm gonna take this tape off, but basically wherever you make your cut at, you're going to tape before you cut. That way it kind of keeps the steel braid around it from fraying. There we go. So, and then you're gonna take like a little pick or something. So these are what's called a PTFE hose. So basically the inside has a liner on it. These are gonna last way longer than just your normal hoses. And you can see you can't like squish them down. They're pretty good. Just make sure there's no kinks in it or it's gonna kink like a straw. So anyways, so you make your cut, you take the tape off after you've done that, and then you just stick like a flathead or a pick or something and just kind of feather out the braid right there, just so you can slip the ferrule over it, which is inside the little fitting right there. All right, so here you have a fitting. This is a 90 degree, but basically you're gonna take this end off, and then inside of there, there's going to be that little ferrule that just rolled off. There we go. Yeah, it looks something like that. So basically you're going to slide the nut that you just unscrewed. You're going to put the threaded side towards the fitting. So this is just going to go over here, and you should probably flare out those little steel lines after you do that. But yeah, so it'll sit on there like that. Again, threaded side towards the end. And then you're just going to take this little ferrule and slide it over the plastic inside of the hose here. So you'll feel it kind of seat a little bit. Look all the way around it 360 to make sure that you are truly inside of the steel, but outside of the plastic, if that makes sense. Then you're just gonna take this and shove it into something like the frame rail to get the ferrule to completely seat. All right guys, so at that point, you're gonna have something like this, and you'll actually be able to look in here. You're not gonna be able to see it too well on camera, but you're gonna be actually able to see the plastic sitting up against the little lip right here on the inside. Make sure it's like that all the way around. And as you can see, these little steel pieces are frayed out. So basically this end now is just going to go into the ferrule. This one is actually kind of hard to get in there sometimes. You got to really press it. There you go. There we go. So scratching the crap out of my gas tank. So there you go. You have the ferrule in there, and then this nut is just going to come over top of here, and then you just start tightening this down. So for this specific fitting, it is 18 millimeter on this side, and then I just use an adjustable, and you'll just snug this up and you'll be good to go. All right, so once that's all nice and tight, you're just going to slide it over the fitting for your supply and then snug it up. Super easy to do, and it should never leak, should last a very, very long time, and it's super easy. And they look super clean too. So we're gonna do one for the feed and then the return. And then basically for this video, I'm not gonna do the filter and everything because it's gonna be the same. You're just going to cut your supply in the middle somewhere, preferably next to the frame rail. That way you can secure the filter to the frame rail. The other thing we gotta figure out here is the setup for this engine was originally a returnless style. So this was your feed in here. There was no return. So we were going to run a fuel system like this. And according to the Holley instructions on the Terminator, that's the fuel setup that you're supposed to have. So the instructions aren't super clear on that, but you can actually run any style of fuel setup here. So the easiest for me, since the factory doesn't have a return line coming from the fuel rails, is to plumb this in with this setup right here. So basically from the tank to here, and then on the other side that'll go straight to the feed for the fuel rail, and then your return just comes out of the bottom here and returns back to the tank. So way easier. I don't have to worry about ordering a fuel rail. But yeah, you can actually use any of these fuel setups for, well, at least these two. So for the Holley Terminator, this I haven't verified yet, but I think that they have to run on some kind of return style system. All right, guys, so let's talk about wiring real fast. So this is your power for your fuel pump. So just put a little protector on it because you don't want that terminal to contact this base, because then you'll have some issues. This is the ground. This one you just run right over here to the sender, and then just for extra security, I always run this somewhere on the frame rail. So I'm gonna make another little lead there here in a second. This is your vent line right here, so I'm gonna have to just make a little tube to go in there, but I'll do that whenever it's all the truck bed's put back on. All right, guys, so as far as the fuel system goes, the feeds there, I'm waiting on an adapter to go from the factory fuel rail right here. That was one of the parts that you definitely have to have there, but it converts it to an AN line, so I'll be able to take my supply up to here, and then that pretty much takes care of the entire fuel system that we're going to need for this truck. Now, based on the amount of horsepower that you plan on running, that kind of determines what size pump you're going to need. So that's why there's different options available. I think like 255 is one of the common ones, 340, and then, or 300 liters per hour, and then it kind of goes up from there. Also, as far as getting the fuel system to work with this new setup with, you know, factory stuff, I had to go with a Holley Terminator X Max. So I've got most of the wiring done, and I am open to doing a video on this as well. If you have any questions on how to get something like this running and installed into an older vehicle, I'd gladly do a video. It's super easy. If you have basic wiring knowledge, you'll be able to figure it out. So yeah, that was the ECU, and then the line, or the wires are all routed right through the firewall right here. And you know, I mean, you got an injector harness, you have a coil harness, and it all just plugs and plays, tells you exactly which cylinder they are. So you can't really screw up that part of it. Well, as long as you know the firing, or not the firing order, but which cylinder number it is. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4 on this side, 5, 6, 7, 8 on that side. So on my truck, there is a Champion radiator on there, and I kept the Crown Vic electric fan, and it's almost perfect. Like, I mean, it's crazy how close that is. So that's going to be very usable. I mean, it's insane how close that is. It's like it was meant to be. So I'm going to utilize the Crown Vic fan for my cooling. There's plenty of room in there. All right, guys, I wanted to go over something real quick, because I know a lot of guys are going to run the Holley Terminator setup, because that's really the only support that we have for the mod motors. So if you're doing a 4.6 liter 2 valve like I used, or 3 or 4 valve, this applies to you. So the instructions in the Holley manual make it sound like you either can use the map sensor connector that's there, but they say it almost sounds like if it's not there, then you default to using the blue hose that's coming off of the Terminator right down there. So as you can see, I have a hose hooked up to the blue hose now, because Holley automatically defaults to running the internal map sensor versus the map sensor connector like the instructions say. So it's not real clear there. So if you go in the handheld and you do the handheld, you can pick which map sensor you have. But then when you go in here to edit the tune, like I did, because you have to change the firing order, because that's another thing I'll go over here in a second. So I had to have a laptop for that. I changed the firing order, which I guess I can pull that up for you guys right now. But whenever I went in here and changed the firing order, it kind of changed everything back to the preset. So under ignition parameters over here on the left, this is where you're going to change your firing order. And I know it seems sketchy because it's opposite banks. It's the same order, just starts with a different cylinder, if that makes sense. And then you want to set ignition type to custom, and then you go to configure, and then it'll have you set up these parameters right here. You can take screenshots and set these up. But the reason why, I mean, it shows you right here. So your sensor's here and your timing pointer's over here. So it's essentially like 180 from what Holley has it set as, from what from what I can see. So that's why I have these parameters set. Now I will say, in the forums on Holley's website, you can actually go on there and see the special cases section, but of course, like, it makes it sound like you can just fire it up with the handheld tune, and I don't think that that's going to happen for most of you. So that was the first thing. You definitely have to do that. And then to check to see if the map sensor is defaulted back to what Holley had it set as, you just hit sensors right here in the corner, and then you can pull up your map, and then you can see right off the bat it shows you internal 1 bar. Okay, so rather than trying to mess with the connectors and all that stuff, I just hooked straight up to the 1 bar on the internal part of the Holley Terminator X, and the truck started perfectly. So those are a couple things you definitely need to make sure of, and the best way to do that is to run a data log. And then you go over to your data log, and then you can see things like this. Like, so the truck started right in this area, I believe. Yeah. So you can see I'm just kind of messing with throttle. This is the throttle position sensor. And then this yellow line right here, I'm colorblind, so bear with me here, but the yellow line right there, that is your map sensor. So it's reading 99, which is the atmospheric pressure of where I'm currently at. That being flatlined like that, I knew, because once it starts, you should see some difference in the readings. So I knew that map was probably my problem. So essentially it's reading the same all the time, and I could smell, like, whenever it would start up, it smelled crazy rich. So I knew that it was just dumping excessive fuel because it's thinking that there's like some massive vacuum leak or something. With all that stuff being said, oh, wrong key. Fuel pump primes for 5 seconds or so, and then beautiful. All right, so I will say that based on Holley's like base tune for the fuel mapping and the timing and everything, that's pretty accurate, but you have to have all the sensors working, and you have to have the right parameters set for those sensors. And on that part, Holley doesn't have them set up correctly. So, I mean, especially on these engines, it's not like a, I mean, it's mostly plug and play. I think the only thing I had to change was the coolant temperature sensor. I ended up using the same sensor, and I had to repin the connector, and that's the only thing that I had to do to make it work. All right, guys, so I've gotten a lot done on the truck, obviously. It's right back here. And I'm gonna go over some things, just kind of tell you how I got to this point where it is actually running now. So, okay, so the fuel is completely plumbed up here now. And then right before the fuel rail, I have a fuel pressure sensor. And the reason I have this right here is because you want to try to eliminate as much things as possible when you're trying to diagnose a fuel delivery problem. So if you have your fuel pressure regulator or your fuel pressure sensor all the way back by the regulator, you know, there could very well be like some kind of blockage in between here. But at this rate, I know that I'm getting good fuel pressure all the way up to here, and this is like the greatest way of making sure that, you know, up to the fuel rail you've got 43 psi. So then if you're still having a fuel issue, and like let's say you spray brake clean down the throttle plates, and then all of a sudden it starts firing, then you know you have an issue with your injectors. I actually did that test because at first it wouldn't start. So I took the pipe off, sprayed it down the throttle body, and then it started firing. But that wasn't the problem though. The problem was that I actually, when I was spraying it, I had the throttle blades open like this. I was so I was essentially allowing more air in. Okay, so that was my problem, was that it was extremely rich and not wanting to run. So I had to figure out what was going on there, and I'll get into what the issue was later. But just make sure that I would almost test it by holding it open, spraying a bunch down there, and then close this, and then see if it starts. And it should just fire and then die. And then see if there's any difference versus like holding it wide open and then spraying it in there. But if you spray it in there, you close it, and then it makes no difference whatsoever, it's acting the same exact way, and you're still having issues starting it, then that would be, like, I would probably at that point eliminate the fuel system, because, you know, it's more air delivery or fuel versus air, which could be one of the sensors. I had to get an earlier intake elbow from an earlier Crown Vic. Not that big of a deal, but the reason why is because the 06 has the drive-by-wire, so I didn't want to mess with that. I just wanted, you know, a throttle cable. So I ended up getting an earlier one because they actually have the bracket on there. You also get the idle air control valve. So what do you do with this idle air control valve? That was another thing. So all this does is allow certain amounts of air to come through to just kind of like level out the idle, if that makes sense. That's why it's called idle air control valve. So it's just trying to, like, if you're on hard throttle, let off hard throttle, this will just help to even it out and control the intake of the air, if that makes sense. So it just breathes the air through a little port. So all I'm going to do is put a little filter back there on there, and then you're done. So another one is this MAT sensor. So I have that, and all I did was just drill a hole into the Crown Vic intake here, and I just put a little grommet there and stuck it in there. So that's good, works for right now. Let's see here. Another issue is the radiator that I have, that's like pretty much brand new. I need the hose to come straight down through here. The police interceptor has a hose that comes out, it goes all the way across, and that's where the oil cooler ties into, and then it goes in through this side. I didn't want to deal with that. I didn't want the nastiness of all that crap hanging down there. So all I did was I went and bought like an oil filter relocation kit. All right, so I ran some AN hoses all the way down through here, and then I tied it into this oil filter mount, and then essentially I'm just going to mount it up on the frame rail where it's really easy to service this. And the other nice thing is that if I ever need to tie into these hoses, there's also an oil pressure sensor right there too, but if I ever need to tie into the hoses right here, and that is not a leak, that's just water that's collected up there, but if I need to tie into this and run an inline cooler, or, you know, run a supply for a turbo, then I can do that. So those options are all there. And then your water neck is essentially just a fitting that also ties into that little plate. So it's like an adapter plate with oil filter relocation mounts, and I'll link to that down in the description in case you want to use that. All right, I hope I answered some questions for you. The fuel pump that I went with was an N-tank fuel pump. The tank itself is from Tanks Incorporated, like I said. But basically the Holley Terminator has a wire that goes out to whatever fuel pump you're trying to run. And as long as it's a low enough powered fuel pump, it's not going to pull a crazy amount of amps. I think the limit's up to 15 or something. As long as it's under 15, you can actually run that pump perfectly fine on that wire, just running it all the way back to the fuel pump itself. If yours is going to pull over 15, then you want to run something like this, where it's just a fuel pump relay. And then essentially the Holley will be, the wire from Holley will be the trigger wire, I'm pretty sure. So, but for this setup, this horsepower and everything, it's going to be perfectly fine on this for right now. If I ever upgrade to a higher level fuel pump, then that's, I mean, I'll figure it out after that, but I'll probably have to run a relay at that point. So another thing that's super important as far as the fuel system is concerned is just making sure that you have the right injectors and knowing the stats on your injectors. So I think the Holley for that tune defaults to 19 pound-per-hour injectors, and I have 24. So I think 24, yeah, or 23.7 or something like that. But 24 is what it's listed as under the Holley software. So you want to make sure that you know what your injectors are. If you don't know, pull an injector out. There's a number, part number on it. Look it up, and there's a website. It's like Injector Planet or World or something like that, and it'll tell you exactly what the pressure is. So yeah, just those little things are super important in making sure that you don't have any issues with fuel delivery. All right, so this is my first time on a Holley Terminator setup. I've ran some other fuel injection stuff that you guys have seen in the channel, but this is my first time using that software. So, you know, I had to kind of iron some things out. I feel like I've looked at data logs right now for so long that I have like retinal damage, but it is very nice to have this software because, again, it tells you exactly what's going on, and it tells you, like, you have all your fuel maps and everything laid out real nice, and it is very convenient software to use. So if you guys end up going that route, I am more than happy to help you, because, like I said, any sensor that's just like put in there under the wrong parameters can literally prevent you from being able to start it. So, all right, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you have any questions at all about the fuel system setup, or maybe you're having issues with yours or the Terminator or anything, please let me know. Send me a message. I'll help you as much as I can. Stay tuned for the next one too, because it's actually going to be on the road very soon. So thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.